Hi everyone, this is Sam here, a current college student at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Welcome to my podcast, College Conscience, where we talk about the good, the bad, and everything in between with the college experience. With each episode, I focus on a different topic pertaining to college life with a different friend, and I really want to hear their perspectives and see what advice they have for me and anyone who might listen about that specific topic. Some examples include health and wellness, academics, professional career, exploration, and even more. So if you're interested in any of those topics, please stick around and hear what my friends have to say. Hey Kailey, thanks so much for deciding to be on my podcast. Really happy to have you. Can you just give a quick introduction of yourself as well as the topic we'll be talking about today?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Kailey Shafakloy. I am a third year in the college studying government and minoring in Spanish, and I'm also part of the Entrepreneurship Fellows program, born and raised in San Francisco, California.
Awesome. And what are we going to be talking about?
We'll be talking about iterations. So iterations of ourselves, both like professionally and academically, but also even personally.
Yeah, let's dive right in. So, to you, what did iterations mean coming into college? So, a few
Mhm.
years now, and how has that definition changed based on where you are now?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think going into college, I saw myself as very one-dimensional, and I thought that the version of myself coming into college would definitely be different from the version coming out of, but I didn't expect for college to not just be an academic transformation for me, but also like personally. Um, I think since being here 3 years, I've realized that a lot of the things that have most challenged me as a person have been not just within the classroom, but also within various roles that you hold on campus and even conflicts that you have with people who you thought were your best friends, and all of it kind of just pointing towards different versions of yourself that keep on morphing into the next one. And I just didn't expect that kind of growth and development to be so fluid and so pervasive. But it's been pleasant for me to experience, I think, because I'm learning a lot, I think, since I've been here.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think I can definitely relate to that. Very similar feelings on that for
Mm-hmm.
sure. I think if we could start with the academic part and then get into the other categories as well. Academically, I feel like Georgetown classes do have a lot of iterations built into them,
Mm-hmm.
either through like group projects or individual ones where like you get feedback and then you have to either make a second draft or do
Yeah.
something to kind of improve on a product you had. Is that something you were expecting coming into Georgetown, or is that something you felt like you had to adjust and adapt to?
It was definitely adjust and adapt to for me. I I think like a lot of people came in thinking that I could handle the academics from the get-go and realized quite quickly that there was a bit of a learning curve. You're now just a small fish in a big pond, and we're all used to being the biggest fish in the small ponds. So it was humbling in the best way possible because I think I have learned quite a bit from being like the lowest score on the Canvas module, like for test results, like the lowest score within that mean grades. A lot of like learning, I think, as I go, and also realizing that I can't let myself get bogged down in like the little failures that I come across because I think I've had plenty of moments of just like questioning self doubt. Like we've been branded for quite a bit by this time by our academic success, and you attribute a lot of your own personal validation to that. And then the second that that's thrown into question, you feel a little confused, and you're like, "Am I still the same person that I was a month ago? Am I still smart? Am I still bound for success? Does this throw a wrench in all my plans?" And I've learned the value of like having to pick myself back up and also realize that I need people around me to help me with that.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And I think that's something that a lot of students struggle with and
Mhm.
learn on their own time.
Oh,
So
yes.
I'm curious, like, have there ever been any instances where you've had to help like a friend realize that? Like if
Mhm.
a friend is telling you about their academic struggles or like not getting what they want the first time, like have you
Mhm.
ever had to help friends in that situation?
Definitely. I think I've both been the friend helped by others, thankfully, but also been the one kind of trying to guide them in that. And a lot of the time, we're trying to force ourselves to like a certain subject or like a certain thing because we think that that's what we want. And then with the friends that I've helped in those circumstances, they've realized like, okay, this is actually something I'm not excited about, and that's part of why I'm not motivated to do better and to try harder. Because innately, I'm not drawn to this whatsoever, and I'm forcing myself to fit into this mold and become like a stellar econ student when I actually hate econ. And I've been guilty of that, so I think have been able, luckily, to help out some of my friends in that similar position.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think moving on to the professional realm, there are so many, like, I think professional development opportunities at any college,
Mhm.
but since we go to Georgetown, we know what Georgetown tries to do for us
Mhm.
career-wise. And I think in some ways, like, the professional realm is where you go through the most iterations because it's not just
Mhm.
about the different types of fields that you could potentially explore, but it's
Yeah.
about the process of like obtaining positions in those fields. So I'm curious, like, in any part of your professional journey so far at Georgetown, where have you seen iterations be like the most clear or the most explicit?
Yeah. I definitely think, um, with Georgetown Bubble, even, the student-run, student-owned boba company that we have on campus, like, serving in the role of chief operations officer since earlier in 2022, I've realized that when it comes to iterations, being a leader is not just being the person telling people when to show up and how to show up and where to show up. It's been a lot of having to delineate boundaries, having to lay out expectations, and having to enforce that too regularly. Like, I think it was something that I didn't realize was as important in leadership as it ended up being. I used to think, especially in high school, that like leadership just meant, okay, I'm at the front of the room with the microphone, I'm the center of attention, and I'm directing everything and telling people what to do. And the person who can do that the most effectively is the leader, and a really effective leader. But then you come into this environment when everyone has their own respective abilities and their own respective gifts, and you realize that the best leader can recognize the areas where people succeed and thrive, and if anything, just push them towards being the best version of themselves in those capacities. Um, I think that my definition of leadership has evolved a great deal, and it's something that I've only really learned from observing, honestly, people like even you, Sam.
Oh, thanks.
Seeing people like excel at what they care about and what they're best at has at least informed my perspective of how I can try to bring that out in other people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like just staying on that point about iteration specifically,
Mhm.
how would you define like some of the iterations you went through with Bubble,
Mhm.
like any specific moments or things where you felt like, okay, this is like how I'm doing it differently, and now I'm doing it
Mhm.
differently again. Like in any specific aspect, what do you think speaks to you in terms of seeing that iteration play itself out?
Yeah, I think when we first even assumed new leadership roles in the company, it was me and like three other people just joining the leadership board for the first time. And we all had very similar related visions of just, oh, okay, we want to like see success for Bubble. But we all also had different priorities motivating that. So, me, for example, I really wanted to make sure that we pushed the best possible product that we could out into the market. And then someone else was like, no, we really need to change the brand image. We want everyone to recognize us on campus. Like, that's the most important thing, awareness. And it's in realizing too that those visions are not inherently incompatible. Like, they can happen at the same time, and working towards that changing perception too of Bubble on campus is something that you can't just do with a single action. It was something that we had to work towards collectively, and that included both trying to disseminate the word about Bubble and like our changing recipes, but also trying to focus on like research and development and making sure that there was that quality control there. Um, so, in terms of talking on those iterations, it was like realizing that our different leadership styles also had to work in conjunction with each other. You can't have clashing opinions or like different perspectives butting heads. It's like all of us just wanting the same goal at the end of the day. And we had to overcome, I think, even especially on my end, like the ego part of it, in thinking like I just assumed this leadership role, I have the power to change everything, so I'm going to do that now. Definitely had to put that aside and realize like I'm not the only one in this role too with the same amount of power. I have these perfectly competent people right next to me who have fantastic opinions and ways of approaching things, and we can all learn from that too. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, for sure. I think that's such a valuable thing to know in any organization with any sort of like
Mhm.
hierarchy, because I think a lot of college organizations and clubs really are run better when there's multiple people at the top. Not
Mhm.
too much, because like at a point it becomes excessive and probably harmful to the organization.
Mhm.
But I mean, with my experience, at least with like the Chinese Student Alliance, where I have a co-president, I think
Mhm.
it's nice to have like a vibe check sometimes, because like you said, like people's visions aren't inherently mutually exclusive, and like
Mhm.
it's not like you have to choose one or the other all the time. But I think just being able to have that like second person or third person or fourth person being able to contribute their thoughts as well ultimately like makes a student run organization, no matter like how big or how small, I think it just makes it better.
Yeah.
um and I think that's definitely like a valid point on the professional side. And then we can come back to that, should the conversation take us there. But I'm also really curious, like in a personal way, I think
Mhm.
iterations for me show up the most in the friendships that you make in
Mhm.
college, and how many different like friendships you go through,
Mhm.
and not necessarily like leaving behind others, but just like shifting who you talk to based on like
Yeah.
your classes, like the environment, semester by semester even. So what are just like your initial thoughts on what you've seen so far with your friendships at Georgetown, starting
Mhm.
from day one freshman year to now?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about this a lot recently in relation to, like, growing pains even, because I think college parallels a lot to high school in the way that we meet people, we figure out after a bit of that kind of experience and those various different people that we come across, like who we might want to align ourselves with and who we want to be. And we can make those conscious decisions of who we want to keep around and consistently keep seeing based on the type of people we end up wanting to be. So I do think freshman year to even sophomore year, because we were online freshman year, I realized the value in even just having friends across different sectors of Georgetown, like being involved in a lot of business pre-professional things. I realized very recently, like, wow, a lot of my friends are like in the MSB or in the SFS, and I like forget a lot of the time that I'm a gov major. Like I have a liberal arts background, and something I care about a lot is like politics and social impact. And when I talk to people who I don't see super often in like the nursing school and even like American studies, like it forces me to remember that there are things beyond my biggest focuses right now, like career, and post grad opportunities. And it kind of grounds me in a way, I think, because within Georgetown, it's very easy to get caught up too in those kinds of pressures and goals, which are, of course, very important. But at the end of the day, like I need to also remember like the time that I spend with people here is also going to inform who I end up wanting to surround myself with after college. And something I care about a lot is people who challenge me. And I've found that the people who challenge me most are the ones who live a life completely different from mine. So, like, I've been hanging out a lot recently, even with people from the nursing school, because they remind me of a lot of my high school friends who are also in nursing. Um, but it's like recognizing that they're waking up at like 5, 4 a.m. for their clinicals, going into the hospital and spending their entire day like helping other people in the most pure form possible. And that is completely different from me sitting in the library writing a paper on political theory and realizing that, oh, I want to work here, I want to do this, what is consulting, and our diverging like career paths too, I feel like help keep me in perspective, to remember like there are things more important than me. There are people different from me who have these core values that motivate and guide their life, and I want those values to be important in mine as well. Um, and I think also even semester to semester, like we're constantly changing. We are constantly evolving human beings, and like my values as they grow over one semester to another are not the same even from when I started. And that's also perfectly fine. Like, you grow apart from people, you grow closer to people, and that's just the way that the current goes. And I think I've come to terms recently with a lot of that kind of acceptance, in knowing that some relationships play out for as long as they should, you know? And there's nothing wrong with people fading in and out.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I really like the point you said about the values like shifting. I'm curious if we could dive a bit deeper there with how you feel like your values have changed
Yeah.
from year to year.
Yeah. I think last year, something I cared a lot about was convenience and frequency of the friends that I was seeing, and that resulted in a lot of like friendships that I wouldn't have necessarily sought out, like people on my floor, people who lived in the same building as me. I ended up seeing more often than I would have expected. But then this year, living in a different environment and still having those relationships, it forced me to think about actively seeking those connections out and why I was actively seeking those connections out. So if I don't now at this point live directly next to them, like, why do I keep on wanting to talk to them? Well, because they remind me of like at least what's important to me, you know? They remind me of going to watch this movie to challenge like my understanding of theater. They also like Harry Styles the same as me. They give me like comic relief, and they remind me that I'm not just on this campus to like study, to grind, to prep for interviews, but also just to like meet people and have honest, pure conversations about like life, perspectives, stress. And I think those kinds of wholesome balances too are things that I lose perspective of quite frequently, because we're constantly thinking like, go go go, make it through this week, and those are the people who I think keep me through it all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's beautiful. I also think the fine point about the conversation, like,
Hmm.
how do you feel like you've grown as a conversationalist? Like, what are the
Mm-hmm.
iterations there? How do you feel like you've been able to have more and more of those pure conversations compared to perhaps like earlier in college?
Yeah, I used to think that small talk was preferable and necessary, and in a sense it is, but I feel like by this point, being in our third year, like knowing that our fourth year is impending and it's our last year, I realized I respect my time as well as everyone else around me like way too much to just beat around the bush. Like, there's no point in having small talk with people that you know that you don't even want to hang out with ever again. Um, it's more about choosing to like who you're investing your time into. And even me sitting here talking with you, for example, like, I leave every conversation with you feeling like I do learn something. And mainly because like I respect your perspective of the world, and like I respect the things that you care about and like the thoughts that you have. I think my tolerance for like unnecessary conversations basically has gone so far down, just because like nobody has time for that anymore. Like, you want things to mean something. And I think, although that might come across as short, I just think life is way too short to even bother with things that you don't care about.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand like where you're coming from
Mm-hmm.
on that point. I think the topic of like respecting people's time is something I see upperclassmen do better than underclassmen, because I think even now, like when I get invited to events, whether
Mm,
that's in terms of friends, not like in the professional sense, but whether that be like for clubs or even just like general friend hangouts. I think in
mm,
the past I was a lot more like, where am I at in terms of like social battery, in terms of like where I feel like I can match the energy. That's still important, but I think this year especially when I get invited to those things, I'm like, wow, like they're putting in time and effort to make something happen and they thought of me to like invite, and I feel like
yeah.
it's almost like a sense of like I know what it's like to have to put in that effort a lot better now.
Hmm.
So it's like I think my range for going to things is like a lot more flexible and a lot more accommodating, because I'm like they're putting in the effort. Like I
Hmm.
think, and they thought they were nice enough to think of me to like invite, and I
Hmm.
think that also helps me like figure out the time thing and like being respectful of people's time, and if they're like willing to put in that time and invite me, like I think if I can show up, I should. And I
Yeah.
don't think I always had that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh, that makes total sense because I think we just garner that perspective of, like, being in that position of knowing what it takes to host something, actively seek out people who will attend, and you know how rewarding it feels too when you see all of your friends in one place and, like, it pays off, and you're not just inviting them because you feel compelled to, but because you actually wanna spend time with them. And it reminds me of when I invited you to my Taylor Swift Midnights release party.
Yeah, no, that was so
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I loved seeing you just, like, in my home, you know?
Aw.
Just knowing that you're there and, like, you cared enough to show up and, like, I cared enough to invite you because I
Right.
wanted to see you there. Yeah.
Exactly. I think like I don't know, something about this year, maybe because at least for Georgetown, like I feel like junior fall semester is really
Mm.
when you're at like peak leadership almost for your
Mhm.
clubs, or at least like that's traditionally how it is. It's something about like putting in all the effort for that that makes you, I think, more appreciative of like the friends and like
Mhm.
the friend hangouts because you're like, wow, like for once I'm not having to like put forth
Initiate
everything.
it.
Yeah, so no, that's awesome. That's awesome. And then moving on to the last section,
Yeah.
and I think something that like a lot of people would love to hear thoughts on, like how do you process those setbacks that inevitably come like academically, professionally,
Mhm.
and personal or something else and keep going and keep striving for like that next iteration.
Mhm. I realized recently that it processing is something that I end up having to do, like, on my own time, and I used to think that I needed to always talk through significant life moments with people, just 'cause it feels nice, obviously, to talk through, like, a difficult experience that you had, redigest it by verbalizing it, but I've found value in just sitting at a spot, like a sacred spot that I find on campus, or, like, listening to music and zoning out, just analyzing my own thoughts and feelings to it. Um, I like, lately have been trying to meditate a little bit and just, like, sit in silence by myself because I've found that, like, while it is comforting to be surrounded by other people, the only person who can allow you to understand what's happening in your mind is yourself, especially if there's an iteration occurring that involves just you. Um, Figuring out, like, where you're going next or why you're going there next, the only person who can inform that is yourself, and I have been trying also to pick up journaling once more, but, leaning into that alone time because I'm someone who has historically been, like, a chatterer, someone who loves talking things through, loves the company of other people, and I think that people, especially like that, like myself, find so much value in just sitting by themselves, alone with their own thoughts. And I think that's also fine, like, there's nothing wrong with demanding that space or having to actively set aside that space for yourself to sit out on the lawn, read a book, take a walk to a coffee shop, and just people watch, like, all of those are different components and different iterations even of
Right.
self-care, and your process for digesting what happens to you and what you wanna do with that information is your own, you
Hmm.
know? It doesn't have to look like everyone else's, and it doesn't have to be what people expect out of you either. So, I think lately I've just been trying to ground myself because I also think, like, the ability to self-soothe and to develop really, like, sustainable coping mechanisms for when big things happen to you is really important. Like, no one's gonna teach you that. It's something you have to practice and attach comfort to yourself.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I love that. I think all of that makes perfect sense to me, and I
Mhm,
think it's something that, again, people just kind of learn on their own time.
mhm,
And I'm glad that it's great to hear that like you're finding both old and new ways to
mhm,
like process because I think so much happens in college that you
mhm,
need to have that time.
mhm.
Well, thanks so much, Kaylee, for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it again.
Of
And
course.
yeah, it was amazing.
Thank you, Sam, for having me.
Thank you so much for checking out that episode of College Conscience with my guest. If you want to see or hear more episodes, go visit College Conscience on Spotify, where I'll upload new episodes every Monday and Thursday. Thanks for listening.